Good afternoon. For this segment, we're going to be talking about the basics of pollination in corn. At this point, it is truly the male part of the corn plant. It's called the tassel. Early in the plant's life, there's actually male and female physiology in both the tassel and the ear, but we won't get into the details of that for now. We're going to consider this the male part of the plant. And down here, the ear shoot, which will begin to send silk out. It looks like maybe tomorrow or the next day. The ear shoot is the female part of the corn plant. Now this is in the perfect stage to show you where pollination begins. It's on this central spike about 2/3 of the way up. You can see where the anthers are hanging out and beginning to drop pollen. From this moment, it should throw pollen or drop pollen for 7 to 12 days, roughly. And this tassel may contain as many as 2 to 5 million pollen grains. Now down here, we can tell that the silk isn't out yet. Well, we're throwing pollen, just starting to throw pollen, and in this adjacent plant also, the central spike just starting to throw pollen. Here's the ear shoot, and the silk is just barely coming out. That's very typical for the silk to be 2 to 3 days behind the initiation of pollen drop. And we can see that that's exactly going to be the case with these. There are exceptions, genetic exceptions, where the silk actually comes out ahead of the pollen. Normally, the pollen not only comes out first, but under intense heat and drought stress, which we are experiencing in this field this year, it can come out 6 to 7 days before the silk does, and indeed sometimes it has a hard time throwing any pollen under intense stress, and the silk won't come out at all. There'll be a barren plant and almost no pollination has occurred. But we can see here that there's pollen drop, and we'll see if pollination occurred here in a few days. But now, those instances where silk comes out first, it's a good indicator that that particular genetic is probably fairly stress tolerant. I was in a field the other day where the silk was 4 or 5 inches long, and the silk will grow until it gets pollinated, and it grows 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches in that range per day. So if the silk ball was 5 inches long, it tells me that it had gone about 3 or 4 days without receiving pollen. If I trace that lineage back, I bet I find a hybrid that's very heat and drought tough. Now, I said before that this tassel may possess as many as 2 to 5 million pollen grains. Each pollen grain, its job is to find a silk. Once it finds a silk, it actually germinates and shoots a tube down the length of that silk along the ear shoot and finds an ovule that it will fertilize, and that's where a kernel will be created. Now, the reason I'm mentioning how many millions of pollen grains are in the male part of the plant is, let's say we have 750 kernels on this, or ovules to be fertilized on this ear. And if we have 4 or 5 million pollen grains in this tassel, it would only take 4 or 5 or 6 tassels to pollinate an entire acre if every single pollen grain found a silk, which they will not. There's tens of thousands of them that are laying on this leaf, and they will not find a silk. But you're wondering if some of your tassels are wrapped up or don't come out, will that plant still get pollinated? All of its neighbors would be more than happy to pollinate that silk. And I think that's all I want to say about pollination basics.